Don't settle for anything less than you can be. Make your life a masterpiece.
This is a series about how Sigmund Freud's ideas about the unconscious mind have been used by those in power to control the masses in an age of democracy. Last week's episode showed how Freud's ideas spread throughout America in the 1950s. They were promoted by his daughter Anna and by Freud's nephew, Edward Bernays, who invented public relations. He brought Freud's theories into the heart of advertising and marketing.
A man like you, with a car like this.
What they both believed was that underneath all human beings was a hidden, irrational self, which needed to be controlled, both for the good of individuals and the stability of society. But the Freuds were about to be toppled from power by opponents who said they were wrong about human nature. The inner self did not need to be repressed and controlled. It should be encouraged to express itself. Out of this would come a new type of strong human being and a better society. But what in fact emerged from this revolution was the very opposite. An isolated, vulnerable, and above all greedy self, far more open to manipulation by both business and politics than anything that had gone before. Those in power would now control the self, not by repressing it, but by feeding its infinite desires.
What goes on here is the liberation of feeling. In other words, feelings, not just memories, that have been suppressed. For example, screaming, crying, anger. You get a person who's really angry, and they're going to let it out. No! No! I could kill you! I'm an old man. Listen, I can't get all the strength into this that young people would get if they had those feelings. That wasn't bad.
In the 1950s, a small group of renegade psychoanalysts began a new form of therapy. They worked in small rooms in New York City and encouraged their patients to express their feelings openly.
I want help. I do. I want help.
It was a direct attack on the ideas of the Freudian psychoanalysts, who had become rich and powerful, teaching Americans how to control their feelings.
In Freud's work, you see, they were afraid of the feelings. They believed that what they wanted was contained people, very proper, doing the right thing and living a proper life. That's what they wanted, but not an intense emotional life. Freud wasn't emotional himself. He's an intellect, Freud. I was an intellect too, I know, but I'm also more than that now.
The leader of this group was a man hated by Freud and his family. He was called Wilhelm Reich. Reich lived an isolated life in a house he had built for himself in remote mountains near the Canadian border. Reich originally had been a devoted disciple of Freud's in Vienna in the 1920s. But he had challenged Freud over the fundamental basis of psychoanalysis. Freud argued that at heart, human beings were still driven by primitive animal instincts. The job of society was to repress and control these dangerous forces. Reich believed the complete opposite. The unconscious forces inside the human mind, he said, were good. It was their repression by society that distorted them. That was what made people dangerous.
Reich and Freud had two fundamentally differing views about what was essential human nature. At its core, Freud saw an uncontrolled, violent, warlike, raging inferno of emotions. Reich said these things are not the way human beings are originally destined to be. They're the result of not permitting the original impulse to express itself.
The underlying natural impulse, Reich argued, was the libido, sexual energy. If this were released, then human beings would flourish. But this idea brought him into direct conflict not only with Sigmund Freud, but Freud's daughter Anna, who believed that the sexual forces in humans were dangerous if not controlled.
My father thought that you should liberate the libido and have freedom, and he developed a theory rather early that neurosis were due to lack of good orgasm, or any orgasm. And that was, Anna Freud, was a virgin. I mean, this is very important because she never had a sexual relation with a man. And here was this man preaching that the way to health was through orgasm. And here was this woman who had been analyzed by her father because she was masturbating. So here's this woman who's opposed to sexuality, really, and here's this man who's preaching sexual freedom. I mean, there was bound to be a clash, wasn't there?
The conflict came to a head at a conference in 1934 in Switzerland. Anna Freud, who had by now become the acknowledged leader of the psychoanalytic movement, forced Wilhelm Reich out. She destroyed his career.
She got rid of him, very definitely. And I guess part of what I'm doing is getting rid of her.
Explain.
Well, I think that Anna Freud shouldn't get away with what she did, that it should be known. Maneuvering to get him kicked out of the International Psychoanalytic Association.
So you're taking revenge?
You might say so, right? Or wronging a right? No, righting a wrong. You better cut that one out.
Isn't that called a Freudian slip?
Yes, it is.
Reich fled to the United States and built his home and a laboratory. His ideas became grandiose to the point of madness. He was convinced that he had discovered the source of libidinal energy. He called it orgone energy, and Reich built a giant gun, which he said could capture this energy from the atmosphere and concentrate it onto clouds to produce rain. He also said that the gun could be used to destroy UFOs, which threatened the future of the world. In 1956, Reich was arrested by the federal authorities for selling a device that he said used orgone energy to cure cancer. Reich was treated as a madman. He was imprisoned, and all his books and papers burnt on the order of the court. A year later, Reich died in prison. To the Freudians, it seemed as if their main threat had been removed forever. But they were wrong. What the Freudians didn't realize was that their influence in American society was also about to be challenged, and in a way that would lead not only to their decline, but to the dramatic resurgence of Reich's ideas in America and throughout the capitalist world.
The consumer is king. His whim makes or unmakes manufacturers, wholesalers, and retailers. Whoever wins his confidence wins the game. Whoever loses his confidence is lost.
By the late 50s, psychoanalysis had become deeply involved in driving consumerism in America. Most advertising companies employed psychoanalysts, and as last week's episode showed, they had created new ways to understand consumers' motives, above all with the focus group, in which consumers free associated their feelings about products. Out of this came new ways to market products by appealing to the hidden, unconscious desires of the consumer.
Neutral stimulus,
memorability,
sheer deception,
tilt-away steering wheel,
a dream saying the mistress.
Something intimate is going on.
But in the early 60s, a new generation emerged who attacked this. They accused American business of using psychological techniques to manipulate people's feelings and turn them into ideal consumers.
Advertising was manipulation. It was a way to get you to do something that didn't come out of you. It came out of somebody else. Somebody else said, this year you should be wearing powder pink shirts with matching powder pink buck shoes. And I said, why? That's not who I am. That's who somebody else is. They wanted you to be somebody who would buy their stuff. This whole feeling of being somebody else's tool. I don't want to be that. I don't want to be somebody else's man. I want to be me.
In the mid-60s, a protest movement began on America's campuses. One of the students' main targets was corporate America. They accused the corporations of brainwashing the American public. Consumerism was not just a way of making money, it had become the means of keeping the masses docile, while allowing the government to pursue a violent and illegal war in Vietnam. The student's mentor was a famous radical philosopher called Herbert Marcuse. Marcuse had studied psychoanalysis and was a fierce critic of the Freudians. They had, he said, helped to create a world in which people were reduced to expressing their feelings and identities through mass-produced objects. It resulted in what he called one-dimensional man, conformist and repressed. The psychoanalysts had become the corrupt agents of those who ruled America.
It was one of the most striking phenomena to see to what extent the ruling power structure could manipulate, manage and control not only the consciousness but also the subconscious and unconscious of the individuals. And this took place on a psychological basis by the controls and the manipulation of the unconscious primary drives which Freud stipulated.
Think about it, dear American people out there.
You hear him, huh?
You're all brainwashed, kiddies. You're all brainwashed. That's why you're here. They're saying right now, kill the bum. Look, I look at you in the living room. You know, you're saying, kill me.
Following the logic of Marcuse's argument, the new student left set out to attack this system of social control. It was summed up in the slogan, "There is a policeman inside all our heads. He must be destroyed." And that policeman was going to be destroyed by overthrowing the state and the corporations that had put him there. One group, the Weathermen, began a series of bomb attacks on companies that they said both controlled people's minds through consumer products and made the weapons being used in Vietnam.
There's no way to be committed to nonviolence in the middle of the most violent society that history's ever created. I'm not committed to nonviolence in any way.
We want to live a life that isn't based on materialistic values, and yet the whole system of government and the economy of America is based on profit, on personal greed and selfishness. So that in order to be human, in order to love each other and be equal with each other and not place each other in roles, we have to destroy the kind of government that keeps us from asserting our positive values of life.
But the American state fought back violently. At the Democratic Convention in Chicago in 1968, the police and the National Guard were unleashed to attack thousands of demonstrators. It was the start of a phase of ruthless repression of the new left in America. It culminated in the killing of 4 students at Kent State University 18 months later. In the face of this, the left began to fall apart.
We had met the force of the state. It was much bigger and stronger and more powerful than we realized. And at that point, what seemed to happen was that there was a change in tactics.
Confronted by this violent repression, many in the New Left began to turn to a new idea. If it was impossible to get the policeman out of one's head by overthrowing the state, instead one should find a way of getting inside one's own mind and removing the controls implanted there by the state and the corporations. Out of this would come a new self, and thus a new society.
People who had been politically active were persuaded that if they could change themselves and be healthy individuals, and if a movement grew up just aimed at people changing themselves, then at some point all that positive change going on well, you could say quantity would become quality, and there would be a sort of a spontaneous transformation of society. But political activism was not required.
It's about making a new you, that if enough people changed the way they were, that the society would change.
So the personal became political?
Yes, the personal became political. Without changing the personal, you didn't stand a chance of changing the political. Coming up against the state power of the United States was not an option. I mean, they outgunned us.
And to produce the new self, they turned to the ideas and techniques of Wilhelm Reich. Since his death, a small group of psychotherapists have been developing techniques based on Reich's ideas. Their aim was to invent ways that would allow individuals to free themselves from the controls implanted in their minds by society. Their center was a tiny old motel on the remote coast of California. It was called the Esalen Institute. The dominant figure at Esalen was a psychoanalyst called Fritz Perls. Perls had been trained by Reich and had developed a form of group encounter in which he pushed individuals to publicly express the feelings inside them that society had said were dangerous and should be repressed.
It's a basic fear of that thing inside me, like a little demon in there. It doesn't come out very often. It's really hard to get it out.
Now put the thing inside you on that chair and talk to it.
Perls used to call this getting on the hot seat in front of a group. If this were the hot seat and you were Perls, and you would guide me into this process of self-enactment, self-revelation, of staying present to all the parts of yourself and noticing it, and then taking ownership of this.
As the demon?
Yeah.
Yes, I can come out. I can come right out of him, and I can push him aside. So that
you, say you.
I can push you aside.
Yeah. Be the demon with each one of us.
I can make you all cry. I can make you all feel terrible. Maybe even forever. I can make this mouth here, do things and say things. I can almost destroy anyone, each one of you, if I get out. There isn't one of you that I would spare. Not even you.
Yeah. How do you feel now?
I feel better. I mean, I feel very honest.
Yeah. And you notice the increase of power.
In other words, taking ownership of who you are and how you act and how you feel. Your whole being in the world. In other words, giving you autonomy, owning your freedom.
I'm frightening. When I have my power, I am frightening.
Say, I frighten you with my power.
I frighten you with my power.
Now, where do you feel the power? In your hands? In your muscles? Where else?
Wake up! I want you to do for me, God damn you!
Okay. Stop it.
You. It was not phony movement. That's what I wanted to do, and I did it.
What Perls and others working at Esalen believed was that they were creating ways that allowed individuals to express their true inner selves.
I want them to applaud for me.
Out of this, they believed, would come new autonomous beings free of social conditioning. To the left, defeated in the wake of Chicago, it was an enormously attractive idea. These techniques could be used to unleash a new, powerful self, strong enough to overthrow the old order. In the late 60s and early 70s, thousands flocked to Esalen. Only a few years before, it had been an obscure fringe institute. Now it became the centre of a national movement for personal transformation, the human potential movement.
So it became magnetic. People wanted to join this stream of exploration. Within 7 or 8 years, there were about 200 of these centers in America, looking mainly to Esalen for the leadership.
I feel so liberated.
Really? It's fantastic.
And it took on a big political agenda. You could not separate personal transformation from social transformation. The two go together.
As the movement grew, the leaders of Esalen decided to try and use their techniques to solve social problems. They began with racism. They organised an encounter group for white and black radicals. Both groups would be encouraged to express their inner racist feelings which had been instilled in them by society. By doing this, they would transcend those feelings and encounter each